It's good to be back, Dad, for podcast number 40. Yeah. It's crazy that we've come this far.
Yes.
There are workmen working outside, working on the water, so hopefully there won't be too many distractions as we do this. But this is podcast 40, and we're going to look at the 12 men Jesus selected to be his apostles.
Mm.
So it's going to be twofold. We'll look at their ministry with Jesus, and then we'll also look at what they did after Jesus returned to heaven, which I find to be very interesting. Of course, we always take that with a grain of salt,
right?
Because it's non-biblical history for most of them. So we'll be seeing what they did after Jesus left. And we're going to be seeing how the apostles give some of the best proof for the resurrection of Jesus. We have a group of 11 guys, because we don't count Judas.
That's right.
And we won't look at Matthias really today.
Yeah.
And if it was some kind of hoax, I believe when they were brought before the judges or brought before, their executioners, they would have denied Jesus.
Absolutely.
If you know it's fake.
That's right.
If you were the ones who took his body out of the tomb,
right,
you would say, hey, I'm not dying for this.
Exactly.
Where all 11 of these guys will die horrible deaths, all except John. And when we say horrible, it's like, there's some really gross ways to die.
That's right.
And yet they all went down saying, we saw it. We saw Jesus. We know he's alive. So they couldn't deny what they had seen with their eyes. So these eyewitnesses accounts are very important. Yeah. So this is podcast 40. Jesus picks 12 apostles from his many disciples, which is taken from Mark 3 and Luke 6.
Good morning. It's hard to believe we're back here at number 40. These have seemed to go rapidly. And speaking of 40, today, as I was thinking about the introduction, 45 years I've been teaching Bible studies. I started at the old age of 17, and I'm taking everybody somewhere in just a moment with that. But I was 17, but I've been doing this for 45 years. And it's amazing the path the Lord takes you down. My first book that came as a result of my dissertation was my preaching book, Preaching with Fire's ETA. And it's exciting because of the cumulative knowledge you get. Recently, I sent 24 of these copies to John Mark Fodra in Lipa City, which is about 50 miles outside of Manila, because he's training some students at the Word of Life. And it's fun to think about. But then I got thinking about you, my mini Bible me. Because what was the age when you started teaching Bible studies?
I was about 12.
Yeah, so you started even 5 years younger than I did. I didn't get saved until a bit later. But yeah, you were about age 12 teaching Bible studies. And now this has led to Pastor Kenny's Classroom, which is your series. And I always like you to kind of explain what you got going on there. It's fun for me to see as a father. I am marvel at your training of the youth, but then to be able to take this to places that you and I will probably never physically go, like the Philippines. They can put this stuff in their public schools, which is exciting for us.
Yeah, we did what was that? 7 hours or so road trip to Ohio. It was Becca's grandfather's 90th birthday.
Yeah, that's great.
So we wanted to support him. So had a good time, but I wrote a bunch of songs for the Pastor Kenny's Classroom, and we listened to it like the whole way there. And the playlist is only 40 minutes long, so it was kind of overbearing after a while. But it's so fun hearing the kids. They keep saying, "Play the songs, play the songs."
Yeah, it was beautiful.
And it's just straight scripture. So it's things are going well. So, and I know at the end you'll want to talk about your new book release.
Yes.
Just happened. So we're very excited about that. And maybe at the end of the podcast, we can touch on that, because that's a big thing. But why don't we just move right into this episode? As we are picking up, there are no direct quotes from Jesus in today's podcast. Right. And since it's the Jesus Said That series, looking at every word Jesus said, you might say, well, why do we look at this? And it's because it's such an important time in Jesus's ministry. There's kind of this false view that Jesus, soon as he started his ministry, called apostles.
Right.
But he didn't do it for quite a while. Yeah. I think we're 40 podcasts in, and we didn't even look at the birth and all that type of stuff.
Right. Yeah.
And this is when he's finally calling people, because he's just getting large crowds. He needs basically assistance. He needs to delegate. Yeah. So we're going to see here that this is based on our context or background from last podcast, and we do these every 2 weeks, so I always have to review and say, okay, well,
sure,
because there's so many Bible studies and stuff we do in the middle that it's like, oh, where were we?
Yeah.
So huge crowds were coming from every direction to hear Jesus. The crowd had many good desires.
Yeah.
They wanted to hear him. They wanted to see if he was Messiah, wanting to be healed, which is a good thing.
That's right.
But some of them also came for selfish reasons, and some of them were moved by emotions and wanted to make him king.
Yeah.
So there were many people were coming to Jesus. So Jesus tells his disciples to get in the boat, and he'll teach from there so the crowds don't crush him. So a lot's going on with that. And then at this time, he's going to go up a mountain and pick 12 apostles.
Yeah.
We need to understand a disciple is different from an apostle. We are all, as Christians, disciples. We're not apostles. Some of us think we are, but there's a biblical problem there. Yeah. So Jesus picked 12 men. These are his hand-picked men. And they would continue his ministry, except Judas, after he left the earth.
Yeah.
This was a big deal. The 12 would have their names engraved in the eternal city in the New Jerusalem, according to Revelation 21. Yeah. So this is a big moment in history. But before we roll into it, here's the flow. I was thinking, isn't it nice we don't have any sponsors? We could use money, but you're listening to radio programs and stuff, and it's like, and let's break for our, and then they tell you something about lawn care or something, or buy gold, whatever. But we don't have that here, thankfully. So the flow of the passage is simple. Jesus goes up on a mountain because there's a huge crowd. He prays all night. I believe this is the only time he has all-night prayer, isn't it? In the Bible?
That's correct. That's in my notes in both this passage and the subsequent one we'll study.
Because I know he prayed early, and in the garden he kind of prayed, but that was cut off when he came to be betrayed.
Yeah.
But then he calls his apostles, his sent ones, and then he's going to come down the mountain to a plain, which overlooks the Sea of Galilee and starts to heal the sick. Yeah. He will then preach the sermon on the plain to as many disciples, and the crowds will listen in. And I believe this is different. I've already given some of the reasons, and we'll go into this in the future. But that the sermon on the plain, I believe, it's not a big deal if I'm wrong, but I believe it's different from the sermon on the mountain. It just seems a little different context, a little different scenario. When he's going down the mountain, when he's going up. We can get into all the weeds later. But Jesus will use some of the same teachings. Jesus will often use a lot of the same teachings as any preacher would.
Right.
And this sermon is going to be a lot harsher than the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
So we'll start with Luke. He would be a new guy. I don't know why I'm thinking of that. I guess leeks the vegetable. But my daughter, Kimberly, she loves, we grow spring onions outside.
Yeah.
And we have one that was like almost 3 feet tall. I've never seen a spring onion. Yeah. But every time she walks outside, she has to just pull one out. Yeah. And she just sticks it in her mouth.
Oh, no.
She loves onions. So it's like, could you just wash them? Totally side point, but made me think of little Kimmy. So Luke 6, 12 through 19. So verse 12 says, during these days, he went out to the mountain to pray and spent all night in prayer to God. And I think this sets a good example. Before important decisions, pray.
Yeah. And I mean, an all-nighter. What a long period of time to have confirmation from his father. These are the men. And you have to keep in mind, one's a traitor, but yet is part of God's
serving his purpose.
Over plan. It does,
It's that whole thing, free will, God's purpose, all working in perfect harmony, Because we see also Judas was a horrible guy.
Yeah.
He steals from the treasury. He's not like some good guy who just all of a sudden is like, I need to kill God. He was a crumb. He was a crumb.
And you can pray and seek the Lord's will about those you'll train. And 11 out of 12, I'd say, is a pretty good ratio.
Very good.
But probably most of us that have been in ministry a significant amount of time would look back and go, here are the mistakes I made with picking this individual here to train. So this is a great lesson and a great pattern before you make any important decision. Spend much time in prayer.
And they all fled him for a while.
Yeah.
So, at the crucifixion, it's just John there.
That's right.
So I think we have to be careful not to judge leaders when they choose people and then people then choose to be evil. Yeah. you can't, a lot of people try to then blame that on the pastor, but it's like, hey, even Jesus, and he didn't make a mistake. He chose Judas. So So he's following God's will to fulfill God's purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And this includes picking Judas.
Yeah.
So verse 13, when daylight came, he summoned his disciples and he chose 12 of them, who he also named apostles. Oh, so I want to be a bummer if you were one of them not chosen.
Yeah.
You're among the disciples and all the names are being called and you're not called. Yeah. Then again, you look at the death of the apostles and it's like, oh,
you might be glad you weren't.
Yeah, it was rough.
Well, even the 9 struggled when the 3 were always with Jesus. And I think they had some jealousy issues going on there. But the verb tense is middle. So when he chose 12, it's in a sense, and you don't have the middle voice in English, but you do in a Greek. The subject acts upon itself to some way benefit itself, if you will. And he chose these, but he chose them for himself. I think people need to understand that. It's the same voice that, excuse me, I said tensor, I meant voice. It's the same voice that's used later on in Ephesians 1:4, according as he has chosen us, he's chosen us to himself. It's all about us being in Christ. And I think sometimes we act so independent, but he's chosen us for his glory and his mission and his purpose. And that is something we need to put our arms around and really get.
So he chooses these 12 guys.
Yeah.
It's symbolic of the 12 tribes of Israel.
Yeah.
We see that. And the term ambassador literally means sent ones or to send. So these guys are going to be Jesus's ambassadors.
Wow.
So it was a very important job.
Mm.
So the way I kind of pictured when I taught the youth this is you have to think of a king.
Yeah.
A king is way too busy to take care of every aspect.
Yeah.
So what does he do? He appoints ambassadors.
Right.
He sends them into the world and they act on his authority.
Mm.
And that's what we're supposed to be as Christians. Well, obviously, we clearly are not apostles, but in a sense, we carry on a mission that we go out with God's authority and we try to lead the world to him.
Exactly.
And we represent him and not our own agendas. To disobey an ambassador is to disobey the one who sent him. That's why it's, shake the dust off your feet, whole type of thing, because they reject the apostles. They're really rejecting Jesus, which is ultimately rejecting the Father who sent the Son.
Mm.
So the Father sent the perfect ambassador, Jesus. And now Jesus is sending 12 ambassadors to the nation of Israel. So we're going to look at these 12 men Jesus chose, but before we look into their individual lives, we'll kind of just see their names real quick.
Yeah.
So
talk about having all the weight of the world on your shoulder. You know you're going to die. Jesus understands this, and in preparation, these 12 will carry on the work of ministry. It's such a vital choice. It had to have pressure involved in making that choice, and yet he can rest in the Father for giving him the direction that he needs. It's a beautiful thing as far as a model for us.
So Simon, who he also named Peter, Jesus gives nicknames. We see that.
Yes.
And Andrew, his brother, James and John, who he's going to nickname Sons of Thunder, Philip and Bartholomew, also known as Nathanael, depending on what list you're looking at. So many times the apostles are organized in groups of 3. We tend to think like Peter, James, John, so forth. Oh, and just kind of a side note, as we look at these groups, we see that in church leadership, usually they pick core and work with those core.
Yeah.
And that's not being unfair. We have just this really weird thing, and at least American culture, that everything needs to be fair.
Yes.
And we look at Jesus's ministry model, and he trained a small group, and they trained a bigger group, and it kind of grew. And Jesus didn't have to have all the people voting on everything.
That's right.
He just would pray, say, I'm the leader. This is God's will. Let's do it.
And with the choosing, there's also a need. I think people miss that sometimes everybody wants to be made a leader, but there's no particular need. Even in Acts 7, before they picked the prototype to the deacons, there was a need. The widows were being neglected. Here's the need. I need my successor. So leadership also comes when there is a need for a leader.
You just don't have a big board for the sake of saying, we have 5 white guys, 5 black guys, 5 Asian guys.
Yeah, that's right, Mel.
But look at us. We're diverse, and we have a big board who's unqualified.
Yeah.
It should be, okay, where's the needs? Let's have these men do their job well.
Exactly.
So we see they have those guys. And however, Luke breaks this group into groups of twos.
Yeah.
Just interesting fact to notice.
Mm-hmm.
So the first pair are Peter and Andrew, brothers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Blood brothers.
Literally.
James and John, also brothers. And then Philip and Bartholomew, who were best friends before Jesus called them.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things we're just going to see that in verse 14, 2 sets of brothers and a pair of best friends.
Mm-hmm.
So the next 2 groups in verse 15 are not as well known.
Yeah.
So we have Matthew and Thomas, James, the son of Alphaeus, and Simon called the Zealot. We know Matthew was a tax collector. We had a whole big podcast on him, so people can refer back to that.
We slept with one eye open watching Simon the Zealot,
We know very little about Thomas or James, and this is James the Less. And I just want to say quickly that James, the son of Alphaeus or Alphaeus, people give different names, he's not Jesus's brother, James, because a lot of people in church history try to put those two together, but we know that Jesus's brothers did not follow him while he was alive. So obviously it's a different guy, and there's a lot of people named James in the Bible. It's the same with Philip. There's Philip and Bartholomew. This Philip is not Philip who meets the Ethiopian eunuch. That's another Philip,
exactly.
a deacon. So a lot of times we see these names and we just think they're all the same. This James we're talking about here, both James, the brother of John, and James, the son of Alphaeus, they're not the ones who wrote the book of James. That was Jesus's brother, James. So it's
I should be taking notes as you say that, because it's a lot to break down.
But there's a lot of people with the same names. So it gets a little bit confusing. So we see Simon was a zealot. And in our Nicodemus Bible study, we looked at all the political groups. So you can go back and look at that podcast when we went into the zealots and all they did, because I don't really want to rehash everything there. And to the last in the group was Judas, the son of, the last group, Judas, the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. So Bible says very little about Judas, son of James. He's also known as Thaddaeus. I guess if I'm with the disciples and they're like, Judas killed Jesus or betrayed Jesus, and my name is Judas, I might change it too.
That's right.
It's kind of like, I don't know, if you're named Brutus or something in Rome, it's like, no, I might change my name. I'm not the guy who killed Caesar.
That's right.
So, and Judas Iscariot is well known because he is the one who would betray Jesus.
Very interesting detail. Just Peter's first in every list, and guess who comes up last in every list? It's Judas, and appropriately so. But he's last in every list, and that there's a reason for that. Yes.
So after they came down, so he chooses them. So it seems like a lot of disciples go up. He picks his apostles, and then he comes down with them. A lot of people, and I can kind of see the symbolism with Moses descending from the mountain. Some people try to draw parallels, and I could kind of see that, but I think that could be stretching it a little bit. But he stood on a level place with the large crowd of his disciples and a great number of people from all Judea and Jerusalem and from the seacoast of Tyre and Sidon. So Jesus walks down the mountain to a plain, and large crowds of people are coming. This is very different from the Sermon on the Mount. Once again, I don't want to rehash everything there, and we'll get to that in the Sermon in the Plain in a couple weeks. But in other words, this group can be broken down into 2 broad groups. The first groups are Jesus's disciples, all those who are following his teachings. And then the second group is coming for many different reasons. Some to be healed, others to hear Jesus, to investigate him, and probably a lot of just curious people.
Absolutely.
Is this the Messiah? I know Rome was probably very curious about this, because even when you think of feeding 5,000 men, you probably have a lot of war-aged men all meeting a guy that they're saying is Messiah,
right?
Which Rome would have had their eye on.
Exactly.
We'll talk about that from another time.
Mm-hmm.
But if we remember from our last study, it's about a 70-mile walk from Jerusalem to the Sea of Galilee, roughing it.
Mm.
And over 75 miles if the mountain was near Capernaum overlooking the sea.
Yeah.
So I can't show the video, but there's a video that you can hike around the Sea of Galilee today.
Yeah.
And it's a 38-mile loop about and takes an average of 13 hours to complete.
Yeah, which would have beautiful scenery, by the way. We stayed in Tiberias overlooking the Sea of Galilee, just gorgeous. And the Sea of Galilee is it's a majestic sight and obviously rich in history for us. Yeah.
Here they are. And Luke 18 gives us the reason why the huge crowds came.
Yeah.
Verse 18. They came to hear him and to be healed of their diseases, and those tormented by unclean spirits were made well.
Mm. Yeah.
I never would want to be in the crowd with those people. Yeah, a bunch of sick, oozing people with diseases, and then next to them are people with unclean spirits. So
yeah.
It's an interesting mix. The whole crowd was trying to touch him because power was coming out from him and healing them all.
And people can take this lightly, but you have the Son in touch with the Father in a sense. He prayed all night. He's obviously the eternal Son of God, and he can do what he wants to do. But I think there is an example here of Jesus staying connected to the Father and powers flowing from him, because even with the 12 apostles, we get to Matthew 17, 9 of them seem to lose a power given to them to cast out demons from Matthew 10:1. Probably because they were jealous of the other three, why they weren't connected to Jesus. They didn't keep up their devotions, if you will. So I think you read these things and I'm going, I think it's significant because he had power that was coming out because of who he is, but then also showing, I think, the Father's approval of his life.
And it's interesting language. I almost visualize it's almost like electricity.
Yeah.
It's almost like the power's just coming out of him. So everyone's just trying to touch him. And so it was a very hectic time. Yeah. Hectic, busy, and joyful.
That's right.
And it's just an interesting time to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as we transition to Mark's account, we'll look at what history says about these men.
Mm-hmm.
But I always caution people, anytime you read church fathers, whatever the source may be, they could be correct. They may not be correct because they're not biblically inspired.
Yeah.
So we always take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Now, as we come here, and another thing I always have to remember with early sources is sometimes you'd have someone in like, say, 300.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So Jesus leaves around 33.
Yeah.
John writes the final, his letter, Revelation, around 90. Yeah. Give or take, with debates. So when you're going to those early church people like 100, 150, some of those people had contact with these guys. Mm-hmm. So their sources are much better. Once you start getting 300, 400,
distance,
you're getting to the point. But the thing that makes it confusing is then sometimes those people in the 300s will refer to documents that were written back in the hundreds.
Exactly.
That have since been destroyed. So it's just, you just kind of have to use wisdom as you look and say, hey, this doesn't really change any theology or anything. And it's just kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I know it's a lot with history with that. So this kind of gives us a glimpse of these men outside of Scripture.
Yeah.
And all of these men, other than Judas, will willingly give up their lives because they had seen the resurrected Christ and would gladly be killed so that people would know the truth of the resurrection.
Yeah.
It's different, and this is important. Our faith is built on proof or evidence.
Yeah.
You can't prove it, but there's a lot of evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And that people, I can say, well, I believe in Jesus and I can be willing to die for it, but, I never have seen Jesus.
Right.
So I could be killed wrongly, I would argue the same, say a Muslim or any religion. They haven't seen their founder. They haven't seen the one.
Good point.
So if they die, they're dying just based on faith alone.
Yeah.
Where with these guys, they had actually seen the resurrected Christ. So they're in a total different, I don't know what you would say, subfolder than we are today.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is Mark 3, 13 through 19. And it says, Jesus went up the mountain and summoned those he wanted, and they came to him.
Yeah.
This account is just so quick.
Yeah, it is. It's
Luke,
very quick.
He goes, he prays,
Yeah.
he does this. He went up the mountain and just picked the guys.
Yeah.
So he picked the 12 from Jesus's followers, and they were given the office of being an apostle.
Yeah.
And they would be sent to the 12 tribes of Israel. We see that later, after Judas kills himself, they pick Matthias to be an apostle. And I don't think that was a bad thing. I've heard a lot of my college professors at Liberty said they made a mistake, but I don't think they made a mistake.
No.
Because he was to the Gentiles, to the Jews, where Jesus then would appoint Paul specifically as the apostle to the Gentiles. And obviously the apostles would go out beyond just the Jewish people, as we'll see. But
I think it's significant because Judas was one of the original 12, but Jesus had given a promise in Matthew 19:28, because after the disciples the apostles in particular see the rich young ruler walking away, they go, Lord, what do we have for making the sacrifices? And they, Matthew 19:28, would rule over the 12 tribes of Israel. So they had to pick a replacement in order to rule over the tribes of Israel, as Jesus had given the promise. And Matthias seems to fit the bill because even after he is chosen, it says that Peter stands up with the 11. In other words, now we have our 12 that's completed. And Paul does seem to have a different venue. And beside that, there was no other apostle chosen. They needed the 12th one. But after that, when others were being martyred, they didn't pick anyone else.
There's no replacements.
So they just needed a complete package with the 12. Yeah.
So they have them, and then obviously later Paul will come along.
Yes.
And he'll be the apostle to the Gentiles, who was chosen by Jesus himself.
Exactly.
We have to make that very clear.
Exactly.
And, a lot of people think they see Jesus today, but that's a whole other issue.
It is a whole other,
to get into. So verse 14 and 15 explains their mission.
Yeah.
He appointed 12, who he also named apostles, to be with him. Okay, that's important. So they're learning from him.
Yeah.
To send them out to preach and to have the authority to drive out demons. Oh. So the first thing in their job was they were to be with him.
Yeah.
They would be taught how to live. They would be taught proper doctrine and taught truth. So they're learning just from Jesus himself.
Yeah.
The second was to go out and preach. So they declared that the kingdom of God was coming and that the king was among them. And the third was to basically prove this authority by casting out demons. Jesus would later give them the ability to heal. It doesn't seem at this point they had that ability, even though he had given it to them for short times.
Yeah.
But it seems like later they would get that ability. So he appointed the 12. To Simon, he gave the name Peter. Now, this is when we have so much information about Peter. So we're just going to summarize. I'm going to summarize it very quick because we could be here all day looking at Peter.
Yeah.
And we don't have a lot about the other apostles.
Yeah, it's true.
I just want to show this. It has some good parts to it. And I actually taught this book many years ago, The 12 Ordinary Men by MacArthur. But it's amazing that most of the apostles are never quoted.
Yeah.
Most of them do not say a word in Scripture. We don't know about them. We don't know where half of them come from.
Right.
The Bible doesn't tell us what happened to them. But I'm amazed how we get whole books written telling us all these facts about these guys when it is very, very limited.
Yes.
And I think the problem is some authors, and I'm not hating on him with that one because he does a pretty good job with it, but they try to fill in the gaps and give us a lot of facts that we don't know. I remember, and I loved the professor. I had Elmer Towns, and I really liked him. But he would say, James was the silent apostle, and then we had like this whole lesson on being silent and stuff. And it's like, well, maybe he's just never quoted.
Right, yeah.
He was with Jesus 3 years. I'm sure he talked and probably talked a lot, but it just wasn't written down.
Yeah.
So let me start first with the biblical stuff, what we do know. And I don't want to be in that category of kind of creating myths or filling in the gaps for what we don't know.
Exactly.
We have some sources. We'll say, hey, people in history said this, but it's kind of sketchy, you know. But with Peter, we can start with facts. He was the leader of the 12.
Mm-hmm.
He was over 20 years old because he paid the temple tax, which was required. Not going to repeat myself too much with this. I believe probably the other apostles were all under 20, simply because they're all together, and Jesus only pays Peter's temple tax for himself and Peter, which implies that the others were under 20. So we've talked about this a lot.
But it's an excellent point to make, because most people miss that.
And it makes sense why they bicker and they fight, and they're always saying who's the greatest, because you have a bunch of, teenagers or very young men trying to figure what to deal with all this authority.
It fits. Yeah.
We have other podcasts for that. So Jesus provided the money for Peter. Mm-hmm. Peter was married, believe it or not, because he had a mother-in-law.
Yeah.
Catholic Church, you were wrong. I'm sorry. Scripture's bigger than your authority. He was married. He was born in Bethsaida of Galilee, but had a house in Capernaum, which could imply had a successful fishing business. At least he had 2 houses, that we know of. His father's name was Jonah, which you probably got teased about that. You're a fisherman and your father's name Jonah. Yeah. He was loyal to Jesus, did many miracles. He had the privilege of seeing Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Yeah. However, he did deny Jesus 3 times, but Jesus forgave him. He was good friends with John. Jesus told Peter how he would be killed in John 21. However, the method is not revealed in Scripture.
That's right.
After Jesus returned to heaven, Peter preached at Pentecost and 3,000 people were saved. The church was born. He was considered the leader of the church. He was rebuked by Paul for some hypocrisy. He did many wonderful things, and he wrote the book of 1st and 2nd Peter right before he would be killed.
Yeah.
Peter is believed, and now this is where we're getting to history, but these are very early sources. Alphaeus, we were talking with names.
Yeah.
How it's interesting. You listen to 5 professors and they all say the name a different way. And I guess we do that in English, how, depending on our accents, our regions, how we were taught. But this guy, Alphaeus or Papias, however you want to say it, he was from 60 to 130 AD.
Yeah, he's early.
So he's really early and was a friend of Polycarp. And Polycarp was a disciple of John the Apostle. So John trained Polycarp. He knew this other guy. And they say that, hey, Peter was the guy who gave all this information and John Mark wrote it down. So that's a pretty good source. Then we have others who say that John Mark is the author of Mark. We won't go into all of the church fathers who say that. There's like all these guys who say this. And these are just some of the early church fathers. So I don't want to get too much into the weeds. Yeah. And then Clement of Rome, who some think could be the Clement that Paul mentions, because this is from 35 to 99. Yeah.
He fits the time frame at least, right?
Yeah, he's born just after the crucifixion. So he's early. And he's believed to be the head pastor in Rome. And he said that Peter was forced to watch his wife be crucified, and then Peter himself was crucified. And then later Eusebius, who came in 238, claimed that Origen of Alexander, who was around 185 to 253, said that Peter was crucified upside down. So I don't, it's one of those things. I always thought Peter was crucified upside down, but the early writers don't really say it. But then Origen says, or Eusebius says that Origen, and so it's kind of like, I don't know if he was crucified upside down or not. Yeah. But the point was he was crucified. Yeah. So Peter died for his faith. And it's pretty good sourcing with his wife. That would be horrible. You're in your 80s and you watch your wife crucified and then you're crucified. That's awful. So then we go to the sons of thunder, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brothers, who Jesus nicknames the sons of thunder. Yeah. So James was the brother of John and the son of Zebedee. We see that in Scripture. Nothing groundbreaking there. Yeah. He's never quoted in the Bible. So was he a mute? I don't think so. Okay. He, along with his brother, asked Jesus to send fire down from heaven, however, but he's not quoted. And he was the first apostle killed by Herod in Acts 12. So he had only short 11-year ministry. That's what I calculated about from the time of Jesus' resurrection to his death. So around 11 years, he ministered and was killed by the sword.
And again, no apostles chosen after him, which kind of tells you the complete number was 12. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So then we have John.
Yeah.
A fisherman, close friend of Jesus, was a disciple of John the Baptist, so very religious. He was the only apostle present when Jesus was executed.
Yeah.
He took care of Mary, and he became the pastor of the church in Ephesus. Tertullian said in the year around 200 AD that Rome tried to kill John by throwing him into hot oil, but they couldn't kill him, so they exiled him to Patmos. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
He wrote 5 books of the Bible, and then he was the only apostle we know of to die naturally, even though he had hard labor. So
I always tell people it's like going to Alcatraz in your 80s. Oh, yeah.
So then we have Andrew, Philip, and Bartholomew, Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddaeus, Simon the Zealot. And that was verse 18. So Andrew was the brother of Peter and the fisherman. We would assume his little brother. Can't prove it, but we'd assume that. He was a disciple of John the Baptist. And then it was church tradition, Eusebius, around 283 to 371, said he was a missionary to southern Russia. And tradition teaches he was killed in Turkey by being crucified on an X-shaped cross. So tough way to die. And I think he's the patron saint of Scotland because they have the flag with the X on it, which is known as St. Andrew's Cross. Kind of interesting side fact. Philip and Nathanael were best friends.
Yeah.
And I love the story when Philip, tells Nathanael the Messiah's here. Yeah. Nathanael gets all excited, says, "Where's he from?" And he's from Nazareth.
What?
And Jesus, the son of Joseph from Nazareth.
Yeah.
So once again, this is church tradition. Take it with a grain of salt. Philip became a powerful preacher and converted thousands to Christianity.
Yeah.
They said he spent most of his time in Asia Minor.
Yeah.
So where a lot of church stuff happened early on. Based on tradition, there are many different accounts of how Philip was killed. Some say he was stoned. Others say he was crucified. We don't know.
Yeah.
Philip was the second apostle killed, we believe, if the historical records are correct, and was killed 8 years after James, the brother of John. This means he had a short ministry. And then Bartholomew, and I thought this was a cool fact, that Bartholomew, Nathanael, he has 2 names. It's told that after Philip was executed, that Bartholomew came and took his body and gave him a proper burial. Yeah. So just that they were even friends after death. So then we come to Bartholomew, also known as Nathanael. And once again, church history says he was a missionary in Persia and India. And Jerome, who came a little later, suggests that he was the first to translate the book of Matthew into the common Indian language, though this can't be confirmed. They quote early sources, but like anything, those sources were destroyed. We've been reading through Kings and Chronicles with my wife, and they always refer to all these other sources. And it's like, I wish we had, the kings of this or this account, but they get destroyed, so you don't know. So according to tradition, some idol worshippers in India felt threatened by Nathanael's teaching of the gospel. So they attacked him, beat him, and crucified him. And then the story goes that as he was being crucified, they took him off the cross and cut his head off. Once again, I'm not sure if that's true or not, but that's what early church tradition teaches.
Yeah.
And these are very early traditions, so they're probably correct. But I'm just warning our listeners that it's not like gospel.
Yeah.
So Matthew, a tax collector, listen to podcast 33 on the call of Matthew to learn way more about him. He worked near the Sea of Galilee before he was called by Jesus, so he was very familiar with Jesus's ministry, we would assume. He wrote the book of Matthew, which was to his Jewish brethren, showing that Jesus was the Messiah. Tradition teaches he was a missionary to Ethiopia, where he was killed for his faith. And I always think that's sad because a lot of our churches, a lot of the oldest churches are Ethiopia, which is a wonderful thing. It's not sad, but I'm coming to the sad part. And then Iraq is where we have a lot of our oldest churches.
Right.
But sadly, when America went in, we just bombed those churches to oblivion.
Yeah.
And really the Muslims have taken over in those regions because the Christians, they got blown the kingdom come by our military.
Yeah.
So Thomas, his name means twin because either he had a twin, and some people say that, and I like to believe this, but I couldn't prove it either way, that Jesus nicknamed him twin because he looked like Jesus, but we don't know. His name just means twin. So he probably had a twin or something. After Pentecost and significant ministry in Jerusalem, Thomas traveled to India, and many people heard him preached and were saved. However, it's taught that a local tribesman became angry at his teachings, started a riot, and he was killed with a spear.
Yeah.
And actually in India, they claim to be his burial site, which is very possible.
I think so, yeah.
So then we have James the Less. I would never want to be known as James the Less in history. You're the less.
At least we can go with senior, junior, and a third, but not the less. Yeah.
Which means little.
Right.
So it could be that the other James was physically big and he was little, or it could mean that the other James was better known as being the brother of John, and this James was less known. I put here, theologians have created a lot of fake news about him because we don't really know anything about him.
Right.
So, you read books, you read all these things, and they tell you all about James. It's like, we really don't know.
First guy in Weight Watchers,
So some historians say he was Jesus's cousin. No proof. Others say that he was Matthew's brother. Since both of their fathers have the same name, possible, but I would think the gospel, would say, hey, they were brothers. They did with the others. Why not him? Many people confuse James the Less with James, the brother of John, and James, the brother of Jesus. And the problem with that is we know how Jesus's brother James was killed. So a lot of people then apply that to this James.
They do, unfortunately, yeah.
So then it's kind of this conglomerate of just all these things. So some people say he was stoned. Others say he was clubbed to death.
Right.
The early church just said he was killed for his faith.
Yeah.
So we'll leave it at that. Then we have Thaddaeus, also known as Judas. He traveled to, according to tradition, Mesopotamia, Turkey, and had a successful ministry. And while he was in Turkey, there's a story that a king named Abgar became a Christian and led many to Christianity. And however, while he was there in Turkey, Judas was attacked by a pagan madman and beaten to death.
Yeah.
So then we come to Simon the Zealot, who went to Egypt and Babylon, Iraq, where he taught the gospel, according to tradition. During these despite these pagan areas, he had a very successful ministry. Once again, we don't know really how he was killed, but tradition says he was killed in Babylon while preaching. And they said he was either hacked to death or cut in half with a saw. We don't know, but that sounds miserable. And then Judas. And we know with Judas how he died, but he was the only disciple that we know of from Judea. Now, we do not know where all of the disciples came from.
Right.
But we kind of assume it was from the Galilee region, but we don't know that for sure. But he was from Judea, and they make a point of that. Iscariot means man from Kerioth, a city south of Jerusalem. So he might have been more of a city boy, where the others were more country bumpkins. So the disciples trusted him because he was the group's bookkeeper. However, John tells us that he stole lots of money. He betrayed Jesus. He became demon-possessed by Satan himself and later killed himself. And before he killed himself, he gave blood money to the priest, and they used it to buy a field to bury strangers in. Because that's one of those things where people say, oh, the Bible contradicts himself. Because in one, it says, the religious leaders bought the field. The others say that Judas bought it. But he threw the money at them. They took his money and then bought the field.
Exactly.
And
harmony.
He hanged himself. And then we know that either the rope broke and he fell below and his guts busted out. Or I've heard a policeman who work on dead bodies say after a time your body fills with gases. So when they cut him down, it's possible that, they cut him down and as he fell. So it's bad, however, but that doesn't contradict himself.
Just a quick thought. I've been working through Philippians, and Paul talks about his emotional state toward those believers. And the word that's used is like bowels, but it's because it's where the emotion and the affections are. That's the only place where the term is used literally. It's when Judas, burst, his guts came out. So it's just like, man,
another cup of coffee. It's gross.
I know.
Yeah,
it is.
That's why we don't want to always see a live action.
No,
I think the Bible's getting us the book farm for many reasons. Because a lot of gross stuff happens.
Yeah.
We come to the employment points. Anything you want to share before we get to that? Or
no, great summation, and more interesting than reading through the first 9 chapters of First Chronicles, where it's just names. You did a great job summarizing this. I was really touched reading this today, just the sacrifices these men made, and no wonder why they're worthy one day to sit on the 12 thrones, because of what they sacrificed. We just don't know anything like that. Yeah.
So we have just one employment point.
Yeah.
Jesus chose 12 men to be his ambassadors.
Yeah.
These men would change the history of the world, but would pay a heavy price. They would assist Jesus while he remained on earth, and they would carry out his will when he returned to heaven.
Yeah.
We know that 2 other men were chosen, Paul and Matthias, but that's for another time. They would change the world too.
Yeah.
And they just had a huge impact. Question I need to ask myself, although there are no longer any apostles, am I an ambassador for Christ, or am I an ambassador for myself?
Great question.
And just to touch on it briefly, we know there's no apostles because you had to see the resurrected Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And Jesus just isn't walking around anymore for us to see his resurrection and see him alive, where all of these men saw that.
Yeah. I think just everything flowed from the relationship. He chose them to be with him. And when you think of Jesus's words, I'm the vine, you are the branches, he who abides in me and I in him will bear much fruit, for without me you can do nothing. It still comes down to relationship. And even as they went out and preached, it was a result of their relationship with Jesus. So make sure you walk with him, and then he can use you appropriately.
And Matthias, it seemed like he was with Jesus from nearly the beginning. So he was very familiar. And then Paul had a very special relationship.
Exactly.
That he was called, and then he gets called up to the third heaven. And it seems like, Jesus would appear and talk to him time to time.
That's right.
So he had a very special relationship too. Mm-hmm. Thoughts. As a Christian, I've been called by God to deny myself and do the will of my Father in heaven.
Yeah.
So am I carrying out his will? And how am I doing representing Jesus and his spiritual kingdom?
Yeah.
And this is a long podcast, so we'll wrap up just our main portion here. That was podcast 40. Mm-hmm. Jesus picks 12 apostles from his many disciples from Mark 3 and Luke 6.
Yeah.
So any comments you want on that before we ask about your book?
No. Well done. No,
all
well
right,
done.
good,
yeah.
good. So, so your book was just released. I got it in the mail.
Yeah.
And it seems like the release went very well.
Yeah.
And this is your book on Ephesians.
Yeah.
You wouldn't describe it as a commentary, but how would you describe it? Because you walk through each verse and then you kind of have the people think through biblically what each verse means, but how would you describe it?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I tell people in 2 words, inductive commentary, in the sense of I'm teaching you the process, how you get familiar with the passage, then the next step of interpretation, understanding what the author meant. Then you show the relationship. So you're walking through how this passage relates to the paragraph it's in, the broader context to the book and the Bible, and then to the E for employment. So it's teaching people how to study the Bible while showing them also
for themselves.
what's in there, because that's critical for you and me. We don't want ever to be like, oh, where do I want to know these things? We're called to share them with others. So on Tuesday, May 28th, it was our 41st wedding anniversary, your mom and I.
I wasn't there.
You weren't there. And it was special because we went out to breakfast, and I laid out for your mom kind of my next 4-book plan. And we pray over these things. When we start to make these decisions, all we want to know, Lord, what do you want me to do? And so I was laying some things out later that morning, we went to celebrate first to the Bible Museum of the Bible. Had a wonderful
Very
time.
nice. Yeah.
Came home early afternoon. And, the Ephesians book, by the way, is with the new publisher, Morgan James. Broader reach, their arms go globally, can translate into languages. So I'm thrilled. I'm told the book will be in Christian bookstores. And so I had a call on my phone from Terry Whalen. Terry Whalen was the guy who recruited me to write for Morgan James. Terry has like 70 books out himself. He was a Wycliffe guy with the translators and just the most marvelous Christian you ever meet. And basically the message was, okay, congratulations. So happy. The book is released. Let's get on with the next one.
Oh,
and, and it's what more could you want? Because you're looking for direction. And it's just like they're ready to roll with me with the next book. So I'm humbled and honored, and just book 12 is great. And it even feels good, doesn't it? Even when you hold it in your hands, it's just a way. But it's quality, and it's David Hancock is just a great guy, the owner. We're on the phone, my conversation with him, he's calling me brother. And I'm going, hey, that's pretty cool. Just because this is all in the family of God. So thank you for asking. I'm just very thankful for that. And Philippians on Fire will be next. Paul's letter to Philippians on Fire. And so God's just been very gracious, and we're just honored to be doing these things for his glory.
Maybe in the future we can do a book giveaway or something. That could be fun.
Absolutely.
And that was such wonderful news when we got that.
Yeah, thank you.
And
I see the recording. I'll play it for you a little later on today. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're doing well. Just got back from Ohio.
Good.
Quick trip.
Mm-hmm.
Went well. Good stuff going on. So just had a little time to rest a little bit.
And you need to do that. I push you for that a little bit. Yeah.
And then my son, as we've talked about with his ears, he's starting to say little phrases and stuff like that, which is a wonderful thing.
Tell the story of the other night. It broke my heart. It was so beautiful.
Because for those of you who don't know, his ears it was like he was underwater hearing. So they cleared out his ears. They thought he was going to have surgery. Long story short, we tried to go more natural route if we could, because obviously he'd have surgery if it helped him. But his ears cleared up, and we thank God for that. But like he jumped on me yesterday and was so happy, and in his little voice he said, "I love you."
Yeah,
which is wonderful, because he's just 2, or he's a young 2, and it's just wonderful to see him starting to make that progress.
Yeah,
because his sisters, by the time they were 2, they're talking her ears.
I'm looking
off.
Up their words.
And my littlest one, he's like 7 months. He's gonna start talking. So I don't know how he does it, but. Yeah. So we're proud of little Kenneth.
Yes, absolutely.
But all right. So that was podcast 40, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Mm-hmm.